This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sara Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to this episode of Roots and All, where my guest is urban smallholder Sara Ward. Sara runs Hen Corner, a backyard smallholding in London. Her website, Hen Corner, has a wealth of information on growing and making food. She runs courses, sells products from her bakery, and has just published a book, Living the Good Life in the City. I began by asking Sara what prompted her to follow in the welly prints of Barbara Good.
My background, I've always lived in London, born in East London and moved to West London in my early 20s. And I've basically really always enjoyed food, and always enjoyed eating food. As I got older, enjoyed cooking food. And it was when my children were born about 20 years ago, when I was feeding them the first few spoons of baby mash, that I actually started to question, where does our food come from? Where does it come from? You know, I've trusted the supermarket. I've bought the things with the prettiest pictures or the lowest price tags. But now thinking about a baby that I've been nurturing from inside me to start with, I want to make sure that I'm feeding them with something that is just going to be good and is going to nurture them. And I had a friend at the time who was talking about organic food, and I thought, well, that's just muddy potatoes. I'd rather have them cheaper and pre-washed, thank you very much. She goes, no, you need to learn so much more than that. And she bought me a subscription to the Soil Association for a birthday present, and every article I read just made my jaw drop, stuff I just did not know. Now, fortunately, fast forward to today, a lot of people are much more aware of the provenance of their food, or at least the issues, and there's much more, don't really want to say transparency, it's more whistleblowing, but you can regularly watch stuff on telly, there's stuff in the news, and we're not having this blind trust in the supermarkets that we used to have. And people have got an opportunity to make choices, to choose food that's good for them, that's good for the food producers, and good for the environment. And when we started to choose more ethical food, organic food, fair trade, free range, it's obviously more expensive because it costs more to produce food in a more ethical way. But to offset some of that cost and to help our understanding of some of the issues around food and farming, that's when we started trying to produce some of our own food in our back garden.
So tell me about your garden.
So the story starts in a small back garden, sort of 13 doors down the street. But we've got a corner plot, hence the name Hen Corner. And our garden, fortunately, goes back and sideways. Now, we're in a Victorian terraced house in West London. Outside the front of the house, we've got an old Victorian square. I wouldn't say Albert Square, I wouldn't say Sloane Square. It's sort of somewhere in between the two in sort of style, design and use. But we're really fortunate to live in a lovely Victorian square. But the gardens traditionally would be small, but as a corner plot, ours is a bit bigger. So we've been able to have a section set aside as a kitchen garden with raised beds and brick pathways in between. We've got along the back, along the long side, we've got 3 chicken coops, which house between them 23 hens. At the far end of the garden, we've got 4 beehives with honeybees, just taken off the first of this year's honey, a huge crop and the earliest they've ever taken honey from the bees. So I'm looking forward to collecting even more later on in the summer. In the middle of the lawn, we've got 2 huge apple trees, which we think predate the house. And I like to think, I have got no evidence for this, but I like to think that the apples from those trees were part of orchards that used to supply fruit and veg for Covent Garden fruit market. And I like to think that Charles Dickens was munching on one of my apples when he wrote Oliver Twist. I know that's complete fantasy. I just like to think that happened. And then round the edges of the garden, we have numerous fruit and nut trees. We've got pears and plums. We've got peaches and apricots. We've got almonds, and the newest couple of trees, we've got a lemon in a pot, which is fruiting nicely. And we've got a pomegranate tree that made it through a couple of years, hasn't started flowering yet, but wouldn't it be amazing to grow pomegranates in London?
Wouldn't it just? And the way our weather's going, I would say it's getting more likely.
Well, this is it. You know, doing all we can to reduce our carbon footprint, but global warming is sort of hinting that we're going to have more Mediterranean climates. And so let's just bring in some of those Mediterranean fruits.
Yeah, definitely. And any other animals?
So it's chickens, it's bees. I'd love a goat. Well, I've always said I'd love a goat for milking. And my husband has always said, absolutely not. No, 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 no. And I had realised, asking friends when we go on holiday to feed the cats is one thing. Yeah, 2 cats. They don't produce food for us. But feeding the cats is one thing. Looking after the chickens is a bit more of a challenge when we go away. But to ask a friend or a neighbour to milk a goat twice a day, I really think was going beyond the call of duty. And we've just been on holiday to Italy, and I milked a sheep in Italy and discovered how difficult it was. And I think that sort of started to just suppress my dream of having a small dairy animal. And I have helped look after pigs before. I've got a little bit of a dream, wondering whether we can get a co-op to look after pigs on the allotment. And the advantage of pigs, if you're rearing them for meat, is you're buying them in as weaners when they're 6 weeks old, and then they're going to slaughter at 6 months. So it's not a life commitment. Some of my chickens are sort of 10 years old. So when you look after an animal, you're looking after it for its entire life. And rearing an animal for meat, it's a shorter time commitment, although obviously very responsible. But no, just the cats and the chickens and the bees that we've got here. And I like to support my friends with larger livestock and reap the benefits of their meat that we get sent by post.
And actually getting people in to look after it, that was going to be one of my later questions, because I'm guessing that it can be incredibly hard work to do this, even on a smaller scale, such as you are in an urban environment. But is it difficult even to get somebody in to water the garden? Or, if you go away, do you find that, you've lost a harvest of something or a lot of things? Is that something that people would need to factor in if they were looking into doing this?
Yes, it's definitely something you need to think about. And friends who are farmers, who have got, a full-size farm, they very rarely get holidays, just because there's jobs to do all day, every day. If you're milking cows, they have to be milked every day. They have to be milked Christmas Day. We were at a dairy farm on holiday once, and they said that there was a week where the weather was so bad, the milk truck couldn't come down the farm drive, the pathway, to get to the milking parlour, so they couldn't take the milk away. But the cows still had to be milked, because if they didn't, they'd end up with mastitis and infections, or the milk supply would dry up. So there are responsibilities every day when you're producing food, when you're working with livestock and plants. But I find for us, just trying to do as much as you can before you go away. So my beehives, I've got 9 beehives across the area in 3 different sites. And I knew exactly what was happening in every single colony before we went away. I'm obviously contactable. So if there was any problems, people would get in touch, and I could then contact other beekeepers to get involved if that was needed. We've got other people living in the house, so looking after the chickens and looking after the cats was fine. But with harvests, there have been years that we've gone on holiday with loads of peaches on the tree, not quite ripe yet, come back and the whole lot have gone. The squirrels have taken them. Last year we had a huge crop of figs, and they literally, some of them had just gone over when we got back from holiday, but all the others were absolutely fit to burst and needed to be eaten like that day. Another holiday, I could see the red currants on these bushes, and my husband goes, come on, we've got a pack, we've got a flight really early in the morning. I'm like, I can't leave until I've picked all the red currants and put them in the freezer. It's always a rush to make sure you're ahead of the game as much as possible before you go away. And then when you come back and you see what 2 weeks of sun and rain can do to a garden, and you're like, we cut the grass just 2 weeks ago, and everything is so bountiful, and then you're rummaging around to see what needs to be eaten straight away. So just doing your best. And with the fruit and the vegetables, it's mainly stuff for us. It's not like I'm growing stuff to sell for market, where you've got to have really premium product and every single apple has got a price on it. But it really makes me respect those that are farming for a living. It's really not easy, and the prices that we pay for food do not reflect the work that goes into farming at all.
No, they definitely don't. And actually, one of the things that people often bring up if they have got an urban garden, thinking about the practical side, such as harvesting, keeping on top of water and everything, a lot of people talk about waste and how to get rid of anything you don't want, or even bringing stuff into the garden can be a challenge given logistical stuff such as where you're located or parking constraints, that kind of thing. So how do you get around that?
Well, with regard to waste and utilising stuff, with regard to crops and harvest, because, when you grow your own, you certainly get big gluts and everything's ready at once. We're really big on preserving and making jams and chutneys and jellies. So most of the food that we're growing, I've got a number of options as to where it's going to go. If we're not going to eat it straight away, it's going to be made into this, it's going to be made into that. And we can enjoy it throughout the year, be it frozen, be it dried, be it in a preserve. So we utilise as much of our harvest as possible. And then with regard to garden waste, we've got 2 huge, almost commercial sized compost bins. And we also have the council collect green waste as well. So if it's tree prunings, the council take that away. But if it's soft stuff, that goes into the compost along with all the chicken manure. So we make our own compost, which is great. Having to bring stuff in is quite straightforward. Where we are in West London, there's lots of access, lots of delivery. We've got a small house with hardly any front garden, and fortunately we've got side access, so we can get stuff straight through into the garden without having to bring it through the house. But with regard to watering, I'm really fortunate. I've got an allotment as well, and the allotment is based on a canal side. So it does mean that it's virtually self-watering, because just a few inches below the top of the soil, you've got a high water level from the canal. And so the plants can just suck up the water there. So I really try to water as little as possible. It's stuff in pots that needs to be watered, but I try to get stuff in the ground as soon as possible.
Wow, that is lucky. I'm sure a lot of people would want that. I've already got envy of your canal. You mentioned preserving as well, which is, I think, important. Even if you have a relatively small space, you're still probably producing gluts occasionally. And what are some of your favourite ways of preserving food? You mentioned obviously jams and chutneys, but is there anything else you do?
So, preserving, absolutely key for producing your own, but it's also key when stuff is in season and it's on special offer in the supermarket, or you see stuff in a market and you think, actually, is it just at its best now? If it's not eaten, it's going to be thrown. So don't think preserving is just for those that are growing, but obviously if you are growing it, yes. So I love jams and chutney. I do tend to stick to a couple of favourite recipes. Courgettes, I use courgettes all year round, but once you're growing them, they can turn from the thing the size of your finger to the size of your arm overnight. So I make a courgette and cumin chutney, which is a nice dark chutney. Another preserve which I really love, my absolute favourite, is piccalilli, and delighted we won a Great Taste Award for our piccalilli recipe last year. Ironically, last year I wasn't able to grow any of the ingredients for piccalilli, so I didn't make any piccalilli after I won the award. But this year my aim is to grow all the ingredients. So I've got carrots and cauliflower and onions and cucumbers and runner beans. So hopefully in a couple of months' time we'll be making some lovely piccalilli with a bit of our honey in it and some homegrown fennel seeds as well. But jams, I'm making strawberry jam this afternoon. A big preserving task that we have each year is with our apples, because we've got 3 apple trees in our garden, another 2 on the allotment, and then we invite family and friends to bring their apples round, and we have a big community apple pressing day in the garden, and we make apple juice and cider, and then the leftover apple pulp we use to make apple wine and apple and chili jelly. And the apple and chili jelly, always popular, and I've got people who buy it 4 or 6 jars at a time and then email me to say, I've run out, I need some more. I'm like, I haven't got any until we've done the apples in September. And a chest freezer where we'll prep vegetables ready for cooking, and then in a bag in the freezer, so we can just take handfuls out and get cooking with them straight away. So utilising everything. So, recognising the value, the time that goes into producing this food, and therefore valuing it, not letting anything waste, and planning how you're going to keep it at its prime to enjoy throughout the year.
There's a few things on that. One, I would say if you are going to get a chest freezer, a freezer alarm is really handy. Have you found that?
Do you know, I don't think I've, but my as is in the shed at the end of the garden. So if an alarm went off, I probably
wouldn't hear it
know.
anyway. Probably you're better off, but I think someone who's living in a more rural area, which is prone to power cuts, like East Sussex, for example, yeah, sometimes you can come unstuck if you're not careful. So I personally would recommend that if you are going to keep it somewhere and you do have a lot of power cuts. The other thing I think is, again, this is completely my take on it, but I have dabbled at making jam in the past. The only thing I've been any good at really is chili jam. It's trial and error for me, and sometimes I'll try something, particularly if it's a recipe online that I see, and I'll try it and I'll make a mess of it, and then I go, oh, do you know what, I'm rubbish at making jam, I can't do jam. But then actually a few more times of trying it, I might give it a year or 2 years actually in between of, you know, me having the hump and thinking, oh, jam is crap and I hate jam, and then like I'll go, no, I'll try it again, and then slowly but surely you pick it up. And I think people can get defeated. So, for example, I tried your sauerkraut. Well, I don't think you call it sauerkraut in the book. Do you call it pickled veg?
Fermented vegetables.
Fermented vegetables. So I tried that with some cabbage, and I've done it all wrong. I know I have, and it didn't work at all for me. But I am not suggesting for a second it's you. I think it's me. But I'm going to persevere because I think there's a lot to be said for not assuming that you're going to get it right first time, but actually some of these skills, they are proper skills and you do need to cultivate them. And I think that's important for people to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you've hit the nail on the head by saying it's a skill. It's not just a recipe. And in the book, we have got some recipes, but it's not a recipe book. I'm trying to encourage people to develop skills and understand how and why. So with jam, you're boiling sugar. Lots of people are scared of boiling sugar. It gets really, really hot and you can burn yourself. But it's making sure you get to the right point with jam, that you've got the fruit, the sugar, and then you've got pectin. Now, some fruit has already got pectin in it. So apple's got lots of pectin in it. So if you're making a chili jam that's got apple in it, then that's going to set really nicely. But if you overboil it, it turns to toffee. If you underboil it, it's like a cordial that then will ferment. You need to make sure you've reduced the water content and that you're not damaging the pectin. And so with a strawberry jam, we put lemons in for pectin. But as you said, exactly, it's getting to that point where with experience and trying it again and again, you can start to recognize when the color changes slightly or the bubbles change slightly and think, actually, this is going to work. But if you don't boil it enough, you've got a very disappointing sauce, which, hey, works on top of ice cream. But if you overdo it, you've got something that's solid and burnt and ruined your pan. But with fermenting, that's something that I'm relatively new to just in the last sort of few years. It was when I just understood with fermenting vegetables like cabbage, like sauerkraut, as you said. We're familiar with pickling. We're familiar with using vinegar to pickle, say, pickled onions. We've been eating those for years. But recognizing that vegetables, well, all plants have got moisture in. And when you cut them, the moisture comes out. When you add salt, the moisture comes out quicker through osmosis. And therefore, that liquid that comes out of the vegetables starts to ferment, turns into something like vinegar. So you're basically pickling the vegetables in their own vinegar, all happening at the same time. Like, why do I need to buy vinegar when the vegetables can produce their own liquid that can ferment and then preserve them? And it was just that moment of understanding, oh, that's how it works and why, and understanding the science and understanding the process, that then you can develop those skills because you know what you want to happen, when and why. And that's what I find absolutely fascinating. So with all the foods that I love to eat, I want to know, what was this when it was alive? What was the plant? What was the animal? How was it cared for? And how have we taken it from an animal that I could have in my garden or a plant that I can grow into this amazing food that I'm eating? What were the processes? What were the techniques? And how was this developed and created? And how can I replicate that myself?
It is understanding that whole process from start to finish that I think is so important. And thinking about that, you mentioned obviously you want to know what's going into your food and where it comes from. And also I think that there's a massively important thing, which is that you're reducing packaging and, you know, food miles and all the rest of it, which is fantastic. Do you feel like you do save money by growing your own?
Well, we add up everything that we harvest from the garden. So every egg we collect, every asparagus spear we cut, if we bring it in from the garden, we weigh it and log it into an online tool called a harvestometer. And, you know, some of the prices are set I don't know who sets the prices, but some of them are sort of based on supermarket prices. Some of them I know that so for my honey, for example, I sell it for more than they equate honey to. But last year we worked out that everything harvested just from our garden, not the allotment, just from our West London garden, equaled £3,000. So £3,000 worth of food from the back garden. And that we didn't eat, we sold. So there's no way we could have eaten, I think it was £800 worth of honey. Couldn't eat that much honey in a year. But then we can use the honey money to buy the flour, because there's no way we can grow enough wheat in the garden to make a loaf of bread. But the honey money pays for the wheat flour, and then I run a bakery on a Friday, and I've got this money sort of in a nice little closed circuit that the money comes in from that, it goes out to that. So obviously, yes, we are saving money because of the food we're producing, but we're earning money from the food that we're producing as well.
That's amazing, and you are super efficient to do that. I am very impressed. Obviously, it would be lovely if people got your book and then read it and said, I want to do this. I've got an urban space. I want to try this. Are there any essentials that you think they would need? Or is there anything that you would go, yeah, I would absolutely start with that and go from there?
Yeah, I really would love people to read the book. Thank you for recommending that. And I really would hope that people would just read it, be inspired and think, is there something I can do? When people come to us here at Hen Corner and come on courses and they see, my goodness, 23 chickens, 4 beehives, all these fruit and nut trees, I want people to feel encouraged, not overwhelmed. And I always say, look, you don't start with 23 chickens. You don't need to have 20. You can start with 2. And I think it's for people to see what they can do. And getting involved with your food is a great way to start looking at being more sustainable. We all need to be looking at our carbon footprint. We all need to be looking at how we're respecting the environment that we live in. You mentioned packaging. We're reducing our packaging significantly, but we've still got some, and I hate it. I hate the packaging, and I really hope that as much of it gets recycled as possible. But if you're looking at what we're consuming as consumers, the one thing we consume every single day is food. And if we can start to get involved with our food, we can reduce, the ultra processed foods. We really don't know how much damage that's doing to us. Starting to get involved with our food, making food from scratch, just choosing what we buy, making sure it's that bit more ethical than the cheapest thing that the supermarket will offer. And, in the book, when it's talking about growing your own, it starts with, I have no garden space at all. I don't even have a windowsill. And we look at what you can grow without even a windowsill. And then if you've got a bit more space and a bit more space and a bit more space, then fantastic. But even if you don't want to grow stuff and you just want to make some food from scratch, just understand some of the processes. Just discover how cheese is made. It's absolutely magic. How do you get something that's liquid that you can pour into something you can grate onto a pizza? It's amazing. So I just say, recognise what an important part food plays to our health, but also recognise the cost of food and the hard work that goes into producing food, and the cost to the environment, as well as financial cost to ourselves and cost to those who are working. And let's try to make some decisions that are good for us, good for those who produce it, and good for the wider world and environment as well.
Thank you very much to Sara for chatting about her book. I hope you've been inspired to try turning your space into a productive one, even if you live in the city. Thanks to you, as always, for listening. So if you listened to the last episode, you'll have heard me speak about accepting ads on the podcast, and that even though it could make some money, I'm not really interested in doing that, because to be interrupted by ads for stuff that's totally unrelated to the content you came here for is frankly a bit rubbish. And so instead, I thought it would be much nicer to just shout out people I know who run businesses and are good people, or who offer a good service that I've personally experienced. So my second recommendation is the guys at Digital Fuse, who look after my website. They're super responsive, flexible, creative, and they deserve a medal for dealing with a Luddite like me. I've put the links to their website in the show notes, and if you're looking for web and or graphic designers, do check them out. I found it really hard to find a good web design company when I started out, and it seemed like a minefield, and there were so many companies out there, and Digital Fuse came through a word of mouth recommendation, and that was invaluable. So hopefully this is useful to you if you're on the hunt for a company at the moment. Now, to see us out, here's Dr. Ian Bedford, with a reminder that we should be gardening with a mind to everything that shares our outdoor space.
Conserving nature nowadays, and redressing the recent and rapid decline of our native wildlife, is vitally important if Britain's naturally balanced ecosystems are to be sustained into the future. And so it's good to know that there's an ever-increasing number of conservation projects operating within our towns and villages, many of which are transforming wastelands into community-run natural places that not only provide sanctuary to the local wildlife, but become part of a national network of stepping stones that are helping to connect over 400 officially protected nature reserves across the country. But in addition to these incredibly valuable community projects, everyone with a home garden could become a part of the network too. And it really doesn't matter whether it's a large garden or just a small patio with pots, since there are 23 million gardens in Britain that collectively could make a massive difference in helping nature recover. And for our gardens to become part of this network doesn't involve too much effort either. Just ensuring that they offer safety, shelter and nutrition for the wildlife that inhabit or visit it throughout the year. And that's quite simply achieved by having as many plants and flowers as possible and by not using chemical pesticides. And understanding too that natural food chains will need to function within the garden, which means that the plant-eating bugs at the bottom of the chain have to be present as food for the wildlife further up the chain. And at this time of year, many people who have lawns in their gardens might now be taking part in the annual No Mow May campaign, which encourages people to leave their lawns uncut during May for the benefit of wildlife. In principle, a really great way for observing how quickly nature can return to areas where it had previously been excluded, and how a little grassland habitat will soon begin to evolve. However, if the lawn is to be mown again in June, we mustn't forget that this short-term grassy habitat will inevitably have attracted in quite a lot of creatures during May that are now at risk of being killed. Creatures that could include mining bees, spiders, grasshoppers, brown butterfly caterpillars, and even young frogs. So what would be a safer option than mowing or strimming? Well, if the grass has to be cut again, then perhaps use shears or even a scythe to prevent it being shredded into tiny pieces. Or maybe create a long-term wildlife habitat, perhaps using a raised bed for sowing flowers and native grasses, or even transplanting some of the garden weeds that might be growing where they shouldn't.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.